Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 12 of season 2 of Star Wars Rebels called Legends of the Lasat. And I thought this episode was honestly a little bit lackluster. There's definitely a few nice little bits here and there, but for the most part, I wasn't too impressed by this episode. So let's kind of get the good parts out of the way. Now, I really liked how they did sort of dive a little bit into some of the old EU lore. Like, the old lady starts talking about the Ashla. Now, if I remember right, in the old lore, and this is a little bit contradictory to what they say here in the episode, is that in the episode they say that was just another name for the Force. If I remember correctly, in the old expanded universe lore, Ashla was a way of saying the light side of the Force. In the old EU, the Jedi Order first formed on the planet Tython, and this planet had two moons. One they called Ashla, and the other one was called Bogan. Bogan was what they called in those times the dark side. And members of the Order who fell to the dark side would actually be exiled to the moon of Bogan. So it looks like they're just sort of taking the light side of the Force thing and just using that as a generic term for the Force. Now, that's not entirely without precedent. I mean, often, like when the Jedi talk about the Force, they're usually referring to more of the light side of the Force. They're not talking about the Force as kind of a neutral power or anything like that. The only time they really make any kind of distinction between the light side and the dark side is when they are specifically talking about the light side or when they're specifically talking about the dark side. But generally, if Jedi speak about the Force in general, they're often referring to simply the light side. So, okay, I'll let that slide. Now, I kind of get the impression that there's no way this could have been pulled off unless that old lady was indeed a Force user. And some of her crazy rituals, I mean, that fits just some of the more esoteric stuff that we saw from Force users in the old expanded universe. I just think it would have been nice if they had explicitly said that. And then the whole idea of Zeb, even though he's not force sensitive, being such a huge part of all of this, I mean, it seems really weird to me. Now, people who are not force users, just because by nature of being alive they are tied to the force. I mean, the power of the force comes from the existence of living beings. But being able to use the force, that requires, well, midichlorians, if you're going to be sticklers about stuff, or just that whatever you want that makes you force sensitive. But in any case, the Zeb sort of being the big deal in that seems a little weird to me. And then there's the whole thing of like, oh, I'm gonna have lightning from my crazy gun is gonna control the ship and fly us through this thing. It's like, okay, now they got away with some crazy stuff, like particularly with the Rakata, mixing the Force with technology. And, the Force has always basically kind of been a substitute for magic anyway. And they did more than a little bit of hand waving, like, oh, it's this way because of the Force. In the old EU. But here, it just seemed like, well, frankly, this sort of seemed like the worst abuses of this happened because of the Force than that they really sometimes would do in the old expanded universe. But again, sometimes the Force can take a surprisingly direct hand in events. If you've ever, for example, played the Jedi Consular's story in Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO, it's basically determined by the Jedi Order that, like, yeah, it seems like the Force is actually directing the training and the life path of this particular Jedi, and all the other Jedi are like, whoa, what the hell? Which I personally enjoyed the heck out of. But the Jedi Consular story is not everybody's cup of tea, but it was one that was really right up my alley, and that's why when I started playing the Old Republic, that was the first class that I went for. Because that was one that really delved very heavily into the lore of the Force, and I love things like that in Star Wars. Um, Now, before all that happens, though, of course, Zeb is really skeptical and very dismissive of this old woman, and basically that guy that he sort of vaguely used to know. He sort of treats them like people who show up at your door trying to get you to join some rather fishy religion. But I like how ultimately we see that it's not really that he doesn't believe in this idea. It's more like his own survivor's guilt is causing him to be dismissive of this. Sort of like he doesn't deserve to be around other Lasat, to be a part of anything, to have anything to do with a better future for his people because he believes he failed them so badly in the past. And I really got to give Steve Bloom credit. He really infuses a lot of pathos into Zeb when Zeb is going on about, what happened back on Lasan originally, and just his guilt at the whole situation. It's very moving and very, very well done. Um, yeah, that kind of brings to a close, though, sort of like the more positive things I had to say about this episode. So let's kind of move on to some of the criticism. Now, it was definitely fun to see Hondo again, but it feels like they brought him back too soon. Because, again, Hondo here just sort of seems like a one-trick pony. It's like, oh, Hondo is sneaky and fast-thinking and always, scrounging for credits. And, again, it just sort of feels like we saw him too recently for this not to feel like a bit of a rehash. Although his relationship, sort of mentor relationship with Ezra, continues to be quite fun. It reminds me an awful lot of the characters of Griff and Zane Carrick from the Knights of the Old Republic comics, which of course I've mentioned I love dearly. And there you have sort of this con man character serving as a mentor to a young Jedi. And while they're Zane and Ezra and Griff and Hondo are very different characters, it's hard not to see at least a few similarities there. So yeah, if you're kind of like that interplay between Ezra and Hondo, those old Knights of the Old Republic comics are really really great. Let me see. What else do we need to talk about? Nothing particular to say about Agent Callus this episode. Just sort of like, dude, seriously, how do you not know that sending those fighters out is not going to get those guys killed? Because it's obviously going to get those guys killed, and he's never going to have to answer for that. It's like you made a stupid decision that got two of your men killed and destroyed two perfectly good TIE fighters for no damn good reason. But yeah, whatever. When pilots die, when people get killed on missions, I mean, is there usually some sort of a review or investigation or something like that, or whatever? I don't know. I don't know. Whatever. Let's see what else. Um, oh yeah, my other big complaint. I mean, I already talked about how ridiculous the whole thing with the with the with the force and the lightning guiding the ship. I mean, we've already talked about that. That was dumb. But my other big one was at the end. They're like, okay, our people are on this planet, and then it's like, okay, so we've spent all this time on this. Let's wrap this up as quickly as possible. So it just becomes Zeb goes to the planet. There's whole bunches of Lasat there. By the way, this is actually the original Lasat homeworld, and there's like lots of them down there. And we never see any of this, and it's just sort of Zeb tells us this. And it is just such an obvious we need to wrap this story up right now kind of move, and probably a budget saver as well. It's just like, really? Seriously? This feels like such a corner cutting cheat. It is almost laughable. I mean, one of the great tenets of storytelling is show, don't tell. And this is an explicit to an absolutely ridiculous degree violation of that. I mean, this kind of feels like something that, like, the way somebody's fan fiction would wrap up. Now, the idea that the Lasat didn't even know that this was their homeworld, well, that's actually also in keeping with the original expanded universe stuff. Like, for example, humans in the old EU didn't even know what planet they had evolved on. It was strongly believed that it was probably Coruscant, but nobody knew that for sure. And if that's the way it is for humans, then it's not entirely too hard to believe that it could also be true for other species. Sorry if I seem a little distracted. There's my neighbors seem doing something weird outside. So let's see. Yeah, yeah. I have to say that's kind of all I had to really say about this episode. Um, just I mean, it had some nice moments, some nice little nods to the old EU, but this just feels like an episode where they just really didn't put as much of an effort into the story as they really could have. And as I said, the ending just felt like an enormous corner cutting cheat that, frankly, a show like this should really be above. And with that said, guys, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.